Jasmine Carter worked hard for everything she owned. At 42 years old, she was proud of her home, a beautiful two-story house in Chandler, Arizona. But her real sanctuary? Her backyard. Tall palm trees lined the fence, giving her privacy, and right in the center was her greatest joy, a crystal-clear, perfectly maintained pool. It wasn't just a pool. It was a reward for years of grinding, saving, and making smart decisions. She wasn't the type to show off, but she had every right to be proud. She bought this house on her own, no shortcuts, no handouts. The neighborhood was a mix of families, both old and new. Some were friendly, others kept to themselves. Jasmine didn't mind. She wasn't trying to be the neighborhood favorite. She just wanted peace. But that peace? It didn't last long. The first time it happened, she brushed it off. One Saturday afternoon, she returned from running errands and noticed something strange: wet footprints leading from her backyard gate to the sidewalk. At first, she thought maybe it was a landscaper or a utility worker. But then she saw it. A damp towel, lazily tossed over her fence. Her pool float was moved. A half-empty soda can sat on her lounge chair. The water level was lower than before. Someone had been in her backyard. She took a deep breath, trying to be reasonable. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe a kid had jumped the fence and panicked when they got caught. But when she asked around, she got nothing but shrugs from the neighbors. "Oh, it's probably just one of the kids," a woman said with a laugh. "You know how they are." Another neighbor, an older man working on his car, barely looked up. "You got a nice pool, Miss Carter." People notice. The way he said it made her stomach turn. But she didn't push. She just tightened the lock on her gate and hoped it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Marcus Johnson had lived in his neighborhood for years, but he barely knew the man next door. Mr. Reynolds was quiet, kept to himself, and rarely came outside. His house always had the curtains drawn, the lawn overgrown, and a rusted old truck parked in the driveway. Most of the neighbors just ignored him, assuming he wanted to be left alone. But one night, Marcus noticed something strange. He was coming back from a late-night grocery run when he saw a flickering light in Mr. Reynolds' backyard. At first, he thought it was a fire pit, nothing too weird. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't a fire at all. It was a lantern, swinging slightly, casting shadows on the fence. And standing beside it was Mr. Reynolds, staring up at the sky, completely still. Marcus paused. Something about the scene felt off. He had seen people stargaze before, but this wasn't that. The way Mr. Reynolds stood, the way his head tilted, it was almost like he was waiting for something. The next morning, curiosity got the best of him. He casually asked another neighbor, Mrs. Carter, if she had ever talked to Mr. Reynolds. She shook her head. "That man's been here longer than I have, and I've never heard him say a word." That only made Marcus more curious. Over the next few weeks, he started paying closer attention. He noticed little things: how Mr. Reynolds would leave his house at odd hours, how packages would arrive but never be picked up right away, how sometimes, in the dead of night, there would be strange sounds coming from his backyard. And then one evening, Marcus saw something that sent a chill down his spine. He was taking out the trash when he glanced toward Mr. Reynolds' house and saw him standing in his window. Not moving. Just staring. And the worst part? It felt like he was staring right at him. Derek Thompson had lived in his apartment complex for almost a year. When he noticed something strange, every evening, just as the sun was setting, a young boy would appear near the playground. He always wore the same blue hoodie and jeans. He never played on the swings or talked to anyone. He just stood there, staring at the fence that separated the apartments from the woods beyond. At first, Derek didn't think much of it. Maybe the kid was just waiting for someone. But then he started paying closer attention. The boy showed up every night, at the exact same time, and then just as the last bit of sunlight faded, he would be gone. No one ever saw him leave. One moment he was there, and the next, nothing. One evening, Derek decided to ask a few neighbors about the kid. But strangely, no one else seemed to know what he was talking about. "You sure you're not imagining things?" one of them joked. Derek laughed it off, but deep down, something felt wrong. Determined to get answers, he stayed outside the next night, keeping his eyes locked on the boy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Derek noticed something chilling. The boy didn't walk away. He didn't run. He just faded like mist dissolving into thin air. Derek's heart pounded. He rushed over to where the boy had been standing, but there was nothing, just cold air and silence. The next day, he searched online for any news about a missing child in the area. And that's when he found an old article. A boy in a blue hoodie had disappeared near the playground. Exactly 5 years ago. James Carter had just moved into his new apartment when he noticed something odd. At the end of the hallway was a locked door. Unlike the others, this one had no number, no peephole, just an old, rusted lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Curious, James asked the building manager about it. "Oh, that?" The manager's expression turned uneasy. "That room's been locked for a long time. Best to leave it alone." That answer only made James more curious. One night, as he was walking past the door, he heard a soft tapping from inside. He froze. Maybe it was just his imagination. But then, the tapping turned into a faint scratching. James backed away, his heart pounding. No one had lived in that room for years. Right? Determined to figure out what was going on, he did some digging. He found an old newspaper article about a woman who had disappeared in the building nearly a decade ago. Witnesses said they had heard strange noises coming from her apartment the night before she vanished. And the apartment number? It was the same door that was now locked. That night, James couldn't sleep. The scratching continued, growing louder, more desperate. Then, just as he was about to call the manager, he heard a whisper. "Help me." James ran out of the apartment and never looked back. The next day, when he returned with the manager, the door was wide open. Inside, nothing but dust and an empty room. Liam had always hated the old mirror in his grandmother's house. It stood tall in the hallway, its frame covered in strange carvings. Every time he passed by, he felt like something was watching him. One evening, while staying over, he walked past the mirror and froze. His reflection wasn't moving. Liam's heart pounded. He waved his hand. His reflection stared back, completely still. Then, it smiled. Liam stumbled backward, gasping. That wasn't possible. He ran to get his grandmother, but when they returned, the mirror was normal again. "You're probably just tired," she said, patting his shoulder. But Liam knew what he saw. Later that night, he lay in bed, trying to shake the feeling of unease. The house was silent until he heard a faint creaking. Slowly, he turned his head toward the mirror. The reflection of his bed was there. The reflection of his nightstand was there. But his reflection was missing. A cold chill ran down his spine. Then, from the mirror, a voice whispered, "Let me out." Mia was home alone when the phone rang. It was almost midnight. She hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" At first, there was silence. Then, a voice, a deep, raspy whisper. "Why are you awake?" Mia's breath caught in her throat. "Who is this?" The caller chuckled softly. "Look outside." Her hands shook as she stepped toward them. Window. The streetlights flickered. The sidewalk was empty. But then, she saw it. A dark figure stood at the edge of her driveway. Perfectly still. Her stomach twisted. She dropped the curtain and gripped the phone. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Silence. Then the voice whispered, "I'm already inside." The call ended. A floorboard creaked behind her. Liam had lived in his house for years, but one day he found something strange, a locked door in the basement. He had never noticed it before. His parents claimed it was just a storage room, but something felt off. One night, while they were asleep, Liam took a screwdriver and pried the lock open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a dark, cold space. Dust covered everything. Old furniture, broken toys, and his heart skipped a small bed with restraints on the sides. Then he saw the drawings on the wall. Crude stick figures. One looked like a boy. The other? A tall shadow with sharp claws. A gust of air made the door slam behind him. And then a whisper. "You finally came back." For years, Mia watched her neighbor, Mr. Grayson go through the same routine, watering his plants, checking the mail, and waving at her from his porch. But one day, he was gone. His house stayed dark. The mail piled up. His car never moved. Mia asked around, but no one seemed to care. Then, she saw a light flicker inside his house late at night. Curious, she snuck up to the window and peered inside. The furniture was covered in dust, but in the corner of the room, she saw a shadow. It wasn't Mr. Grayson. The shadow moved, and then the front door creaked open as if inviting her inside. Ethan had lived in his house for years, but there was one room his parents never let him enter. The door stays locked for a reason, his dad always said. One night, while his parents were asleep, Ethan heard a soft tapping coming from inside the room. Tap, tap, tap. His heart pounded as he grabbed a paperclip and picked the lock. The door creaked open, revealing an old, dusty bedroom. Everything inside was covered in white sheets, untouched for years. Then he noticed a mirror on the wall. His reflection wasn't moving. It just stood there, grinning.